Welcome to the Based Boomer podcast on Eschatology Matters, part of the Fight Left East network. The exhaustion of the left and Trump's inauguration. A new era began with the election of Donald Trump, and it begins, or began, depending on when you watch this, in earnest on January 20th. We are experiencing a massive cultural shift in America, reflecting a unique 21st century post-Enlightenment, post-secular Great Awakening. It cannot be said enough, and I say it a lot. This Great Awakening is nothing like the first and second Great Awakenings, which were primarily spiritual phenomenon within a dominant Christian culture. It will not even be like the more localized Billy Graham revivals and the Jesus revolution of the 20th century. That Christian culture slowly died over several hundred years. We laid it in the grave and shoveled the dirt on it in the first decade of the 21st century. For secularists who have been programmed to see Christianity as a threat to their liberty and their precious idol of choice, this demise of Christian cultural influence was welcomed as not only inevitable, but as a net benefit to society. Finally, Christians could go back to that personal closet out of which homosexuality rightly came. Except this new cultural consensus wasn't proving to be so great after all. The great British author and Christian apologist Os Guinness published a book with the wonderfully accurate title, The Dust of Death, the 60s Counterculture and How It Changed America Forever. The 60s counterculture was the new left in contrast to the old left, the Marxists who embraced Soviet communism and thought the battle was economic and class-based. This orthodox Marxism clearly hadn't worked, and the new left arose and cultural Marxism was born. In orthodox Marxism taught by Marx, the proletariat, the working class, is being oppressed, and because of that, they don't know what they have, as the Marxists call it, a false consciousness. In other words, they don't know they're being oppressed. They have to be taught through culture, or more accurately, be programmed to accept their oppression. Along came Antonio Gramsci, who you see here, the Frankfurt School, the hugely influential Herbert Marcuse, Theodor Adorno, and many others associated with Frankfurt. Gramsci was famous for the idea of cultural hegemony, which had been maintained by the capitalist ruling class through the institutions that make up society's superstructure. Gramscian Marxists define the superstructure as everything not directly having to do with production, such as family, culture, religion, education, media, and law, and especially traditional religious ideas. The dominant position of a particular set of ideas leads to them becoming commonsensical and intuitive, and cultural Marxists were determined to take it all down. That started to bear fruit in the 1960s. The other idea for which Gramsci is well known is the phrase long march through the institutions of culture. The phrase, or something like it, originated with Gramsci, but was popularized as a succinct mission statement by German communist student activist Rudi Dutschke in the 1960s. It is wise for those who are impatient with the current wokeness of American and Western culture to remember this long march started in the early 1920s, or 100 years ago. So stopping and reversing that march won't happen overnight, and we need to be as patient, persistent, diligent, and determined as the Marxists. Which brings me to today, and the opportunity we have as Christians to take the culture back from the secular left. I've argued increasingly as the age of Trump progressed that all the left has is lies, and an empire built on lies cannot endure. Many on our side have wondered if the left would go crazy if Trump won, and I doubted it very much. The election of 2016 was a total shock, not only to the left, but to the entire uniparty establishment. That was not supposed to happen. When Trump was taken down after the 2020 election and the Fedsurrection of January 6, 2021, The uniparty establishment thought the Trump aberration was finally over. Few people, and maybe even Trump, could never imagine him coming back from all that. But the dynamic of the 2024 election was completely different from that both of 16 and 20. Most importantly, it was set up by 8 years of constant lying by the Democrats and their media allies. It started with Russia, 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 as Trump calls it, and it never stopped. After Trump left office, the lies only seemed to accelerate, if that were possible. What most people don't consider is the effect the lies had on the left. I came across this conversation where Dave Smith makes this point.
Part of the factor, getting back to the question of why the left-wing activists are not as outraged as they used to be. It's like they all bought into Russiagate and they all bought into the COVID stuff. And that has now been exposed, just like the war in Iraq was. That it's not that they got it wrong. It's that it was lies. There's a fatigue that sets in. Like it's hard to keep people at this state of Adolf Hitler is taking over my country right in front of me for 8 straight years. Like at a certain point, it's just really hard to get that much energy out of them. I think a huge factor in it is that all of the stories turned out to be lies.
Exhausted is a good way to put it. The cynical elite knew it was all lies, but they sold it to their little leftist worker bees as absolute truth. Every night on MSNBC and CNN, they would spout lies masquerading as truth, and the leftist minions would have their marching orders. Over time, because God is, and reality can only be mocked for so long, those minions would become disenchanted and disillusioned, and many even took the red pill. Which brings me to my favorite metaphor for the rise and power of the left, the Berlin Wall. It's become abundantly clear in recent years the Berlin Wall of the left was cracking bad. As Reagan knew about the Soviet Union and the real Berlin Wall, it could never last because it was built on lies. We might see November 5th, 2024 as analogous to November 9th, 1989. What you're about to see was absolutely inconceivable to the entire world until it actually happened. By contrast, God has given us over 9 years to see and experience what was in fact inevitable all along, which was truth and reality asserting itself. Lastly, it's critical to understand, and the argument that I make in my book, I must continue to promote, going back to find the way forward, is that we are at the end of a process started in the Enlightenment, specifically with Descartes' proclamation in 1637, cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am. When man decided to begin his search for knowledge and meaning with himself and not God, all of the downsides of the modern world began, starting with rationalism, or reason is all we need to find truth. Eventually, this led to secularism, Kant and Hegel, feminism, Marx, Darwin, Nietzsche, and Freud, progressivism, cultural Marxism, and the demise of the Christian West. The reason I'm so optimistic about the Great Awakening we are experiencing and the refounding of America and the Christian West is that the promises of all of these have proved as hollow as the lies they were based upon. Nobody, including your garden variety leftists, wants to live based on lies. The second inauguration of President Trump is God telling the world in no uncertain terms, He, God, will never allow lies to ultimately win. There is an answer to all the conundrums of life in our Creator and Savior God, He who is the truth. And we affirm with C.S. Lewis, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else.